should know, whether it wishes us well or ill, that we shall pay any price, bear any burden, meet any hardship, support any friend, oppose any foe, to assure the survival and the success of the
You have found the 22 November Network, the voice of the grassroots JFK research community. This is the Lone Gunman Podcast with your host, your boy, Rob Clark.
The Lone Gunman Compact.
Man, I wouldn't know Clay Sharp if I fell across him on the street dead.
Let fly the monkey of war! Raining zombies like a bastard out here!
What's up, everybody? It's your boy Rob Clark, welcoming you to episode number 23 of the Lone Gunman Podcast. This week, it's Codename Mandarin. We're going to talk a little bit about The Rock. That's right, the original Rock before Dwayne Johnson, Roscoe White. Now, I know for many of you out there, the Roscoe White story has been debunked and forgotten about long ago. But we're going to start today back at the beginning. But before we do, let me get this out of the way because I slept on it last week. And I want to remind everybody about a conference coming up in September, the 26th through the 28th in Alexandria, Virginia, at the Crown Plaza East Hotel. It's going to be the Warren Report 50 Years Later, a critical look. And 22 November is going to be representing hard there. We're going to have the Dallas Action and the Lone Gunman Podcast on the scene for all 3 days. We're going to be tweeting live. We're going to have some good interviews, hopefully, for you. Some video. But we'd really like to see you there. So if you can get there, and it's a short train ride from up north, it's a short little plane hop. Get there. It's going to be great. We're going to have a good time. There's a lot of great presenters, such as Doug Horn, Bill Simpich, Peter Janney, Phil Nelson, Ed Tatro, and a host of others. So please, we'd love to see you there. But if you can't make it, tune in to 22november.wordpress.com for wall-to-wall coverage, as much as we can give you. We're going to be on the ground there all weekend, bringing you live updates from the conference. But we'd love for you to come. We'd like to hang out with you and see everybody there. For more details, please visit the 22 November WordPress site, which you can get to under my information tab here on Spreaker. Just click info and click on the website. It'll take you right to it. It's that easy. And there's a page up there all about the conference and the links to buy tickets and make reservations and get more information. So please head over to the 22 November site for that. We hope to see you there. Excuse me. Roscoe White here at The Rock. Okay. And like I said before, I know a lot of people discount the Roscoe White story because of what happened later on in the early 90s. But just for a moment, let's go back. Let's go back a little ways. Of course, as everybody has heard, the story of Roscoe White and Lee Oswald, and they rode the same ship. They were in the Marines together, and they rode the same ship, the USS Bexar, over to Japan together. They were in the same Marine Air Group, but so were 7,000 other people. And there's no hard concrete evidence that they actually knew each other. They both had roots in Texas. They were on the ship together. They were over in Japan together. But Roscoe was with the motor pool, and of course Oswald was at the radar installation. So it's hard to pinpoint if they did know each other. There's no concrete proof they did, but there's no concrete proof they didn't. Now, before Roscoe White joined the Marine Corps, he was a very he was a very talented football player. He was very scholarly. In fact, he gave a speech in front of his graduating class, his high school graduating class, and that speech was all about the dangers of communism and the Cold War, about the Soviets, which what we know about the guy seems a little odd, but if the Roscoe White story is true, it could give a reason why he was involved. He was a staunch anti-communist as early, of course, as when he graduated from high school, which is pretty amazing, and not a lot of people know. He married his wife Geneva when she was 15 years old, and a year later joined the Marines. And of course he signed up for a 6-year bid, and in the meantime, Lee Harvey Oswald went over on the same ship at the exact same time Roscoe White did. And as we know, of course, Lee Oswald took an early hardship discharge, supposedly to take care of his mother, who had a candy jar fall on her foot or something to that effect. But he only ended up hanging around about 3 days before he jumped ship on a freighter and headed to Europe and made his way into the Soviet Union eventually. Now, what's curious is that in June of '62, roughly about the same time as Lee Oswald came back from the Soviet Union, Roscoe White took an early hardship discharge. And I haven't found the exact reason for that he gave. I'm assuming it was related to his wife. I'm guessing. I don't know. If anybody knows, get at me and let me know. But he took a hardship discharge and went back to Texas. Now, fast forward a year to '63. And I guess it was about August or September of '63. Roscoe White moved back to Dallas with his family to Oak Cliff. And of course, this is roughly the same time Oswald did. Now I'm going to line up some coincidences for you, and there's a lot of them here. Excuse me. Now, when Ricky White, his son, found this Foot Locker, I believe it was in the early 80s, and located inside the Foot Locker was supposedly a notebook or diary, and there was a lot of papers in there that were preserved in a vellum type thing. And where the story takes a turn, and we'll get there. But before that, let's continue with the story of Roscoe White. I apologize. So Roscoe White joins the Dallas police force in early October of '63. I believe it's right around the same day as Oswald starts at the school book depository. And we'll come to find later, he was sent a series of messages, coded messages. And one of them told him to join the Dallas Police Department. And let me find the exact wording of that for you. Okay, here it is. Remarks: Mandarin, Code A. Dallas destination chosen. Your place hidden within the department. Contacts are within this letter. Continue on as planned. And it's RE rifle, code AAA, destroy /on/. And it's saying that it came from Naval Intelligence Code A, MRC, and this was sent in September of '63 from a C. Bowers. Now, I don't know if it's been established or not who this C. Bowers was supposed to be, but there are two more coded messages that he gets. The next one is Remarks: Mandarin, Code A. Foreign affairs assignments have been canceled. The next assignment is to eliminate a national security threat to world peace. Destination will be Houston, Austin, or Dallas. Contacts are being arranged now. Orders are subject to change at any time. Reply back if not understood. C. Bowers. RE rifle code AAA, destroy, on. And the next one we have is Remarks: Mandarin, Code G. Okay, the other ones have been Code A. This one's Code G. Stay within the department. Witnesses have eyes, ears, and mouth. You had nothing to do with the mix-up. The men will be in to cover all misleading evidence soon. Stay as planned. Wait for further orders. And of course, like I said, the original ones are all were all encased in this vellum inside of a stainless steel tube that was used by the Navy to transport guns so they would not get wet or rusty. And this was located, I believe, by Ricky White in the wall of his grandfather's house. And he was led there by what he found in this Foot Locker of his dad's that he found. Now, I know a lot of people discount the Roscoe White story, and I understand why later, okay, but let's stay in the 60s for a minute, okay? 2 years to the day that he started with the police department, he put in his resignation to Chief Curry. He said that he has accepted employment with Page's Drugstore But it says here there will be beginning October 18th, 1965. Respectfully submitted, Roscoe White, Patrolman, 1884, Patrol Division, Special Enforcement Detail. Now, come to find out later, Roscoe did not immediately go to work for this drugstore that he quit the force for. This would not happen until 3 years later, in 1968. And what's curious about that is that in the meantime, in 1968, the White family moved to Mountain Home, Arkansas, supposedly to work for the post office. Roscoe was. But nobody at the Mountain Home post office remembers him, and postal employment records don't go back that far. Later that same year, the family returned to Dallas in '68, and White became the assistant manager of a five and dime store in Richardson, Texas. The family appeared to have money, recalled his Reverend Jack Shaw, who was the pastor at Central Park Baptist Church. They had a new car, new home. As I recall, Roscoe pledged $10,000 to our building program. White's sons Ricky and Tony had new bikes and go-karts, and the family purchased a cabin on a lake in central Texas. Rock continued to mess around with other women, and Jack Shaw counseled the couple and prayed with them on several occasions. Rock poured his heart out to me, Shaw said. He told me he had sinned against God, his country, and especially his wife. He told me he had taken human life on foreign soil and here at home. I knew he had been in the service and had been a policeman, and I didn't press him for details. Now, let's go back a little bit. In the 6 years following the assassination, Roscoe made a number of unexplained trips to New Orleans and other places. I was never sure of what was happening, Geneva said, but I was raised to let the man do the thinking and not ask questions. Whew. Okay, so after he quit the force in '65, there appears to be a 3-year gap where we really don't know what was going on. But then when they get back to Texas, they suddenly have a lot of money. And in 1968, $10,000 was a lot of money to donate to the church. Today it probably, you're looking at it being somewhat like $100,000 or $150,000 that somebody would do today. Now in his foot locker that was found, there was receipts for $100,000 worth of some kind of bonds or stocks, which back then was a lot of money. $100,000, you're looking at $1 million, $2 million today. That's what it would have equaled out to. Now, supposedly, on the last trip from New Orleans, somebody had come up to Geneva in a nightclub there and reminded her about Rock's part in the Kennedy assassination and told her, "We have another job for Rock. Tell him he has 48 hours to get in touch." Apparently, White never got in touch with the man. Roscoe seemingly became a God-fearing man. It was a regular at church. And by this time, Roscoe had gotten another job at M&M Equipment Company, and in September, he was fatally burned when a leak in an acetylene torch flamed up, causing a can of chemicals that was stored under his workbench to explode. On his deathbed, White told his Reverend Jack Shaw that the explosion was no accident, Shaw assumed there would be a criminal investigation, but there wasn't. Roscoe White's family eventually reached an out-of-court settlement with the chemical manufacturer for $57,000, which in the early 70s was a lot of money. You know, you're looking at the equivalent of $600,000-700,000 today. Now let's look a little bit about what Ricky White claimed that he found. He says, in 1982, I found my father's footlocker in Paris, Texas, after my grandfather died, in an old room at the back of the house. In the footlocker was a diary that told of my father's participation in the assassination of JFK. According to the diary, White fired 2 shots at Kennedy from behind the picket fence with his 7.65 German Mauser. Roscoe White believed both shots hit Kennedy, one in the neck and one in the head. My father's code name was Mandarin, and the other 2 gunmen were Saul and Lebanon. As I read further, it also says my father killed a police officer on 10th and Patton. It didn't say Tippett, just a police officer. Supposedly later on, the FBI took it from Ricky White in 1988. But also in the footlocker, with the diary, Ricky found a key to a safe deposit box. And among that, he found more documentation that, of course, you know, his father was on the same ship as Oswald to the Philippines. There was a picture of them together while on duty. His mother worked for Jack Ruby, which is true. Geneva White worked as a dancer at the Carousel Club for a while. Let's see. And he says, my father had photographs of things no one else had pertaining to the case, which is true. What surfaced among Roscoe's photos was yet a third version of the Oswald backyard photograph that no one had ever seen before. Now, what leads me to lend credence to this, I mean, it can't be denied, it's a different pose. So if Roscoe, and we know he was a Dallas police officer, he likely would have had access to certain files and could have copied them. And we know that later on, what they call a ghost image of the backyard photograph was found, where it contained a cutout. And just from obvious observation, as I've alluded to on the podcast before, it's obvious to my eyes that the backyard photograph was faked, that it's somebody else standing there with Oswald's face pasted on top. And I know a lot of people like to point to the under the chin area and the Jack White research, where he takes all 3 backyard photographs, transparencies of them, and overlays them over each other. And if they're 3 separate photographs, nothing should match in them, because people make subtle movements, they change their body position. You know, there's 3 different poses, but one thing that stays exactly the same in all 3 photographs is Oswald's face. Okay, which is not possible. And also, if you look very, very closely around Oswald's temple area up through his hairline in the backyard photographs, you will see with your own eyes, without a magnifying glass, the outline of the paste mark of his face that they put on whoever this is standing in the backyard, you know, with the rifle and things. And I'll put up a photo of this with the podcast on the 22 November site so everybody can look at it and see it. But there's many things that point to these photographs being faked. Not the least of which, Marina initially acknowledged that she took one photo, and then another version pops up, and she said, "Well, I must have taken two." And then after the third one pops up, come on now. You got to remember taking one photo, two photos, three photos. But Marina's lied throughout the years about other different aspects about this case, and it's obvious to me she didn't take the photos, which means also that they were faked. And I also ran across a picture of Roscoe White, and he's very much in the same pose as the figure in the backyard photograph in one of them, which seemed to be kind of a natural standing position for Roscoe. Also, he had a particular bump on his right arm, his right forearm, that protruded from his arm very noticeably. And that's also in the backyard photographs, which tells me, okay, this guy had a copy of the backyard photograph that nobody's ever seen before, which tells me that he was involved in creating those backyard photographs, most likely because he was roughly the same height, weight as Oswald, maybe knew his mannerisms. Who knows? But it tells me that he was involved with the police department in setting up these photos, which tells me that they were involved beforehand in setting up the patsy. I mean, Geneva White was even stabbed with an ice pick in 1975, and a bunch of stuff was stolen. And it was only assassination-related materials, like the photographs and stuff, were stolen. They were later recovered in, Phoenix? I believe it was Phoenix. Yeah, Phoenix, Arizona. Police found the assassination material. They called the FBI and the Dallas police. The FBI came in and looked at these photographs that White had in his possession. After Oswald was arrested, the Dallas police found 2 backyard photographs of Oswald holding a rifle in communist newspapers. In this box of material stolen from the White House was a 3rd backyard photograph with Oswald in a different pose that no one in the world had ever seen. And back to the Cables, they also possessed Ricky White's military ID number. And when the stuff was found, it contained his dog tags, which had his military ID number on it as well. There was also a book, newspaper clippings of the people that he supposedly murdered. It said he had killed 28 people, witnesses, after the assassination in various ways. Now this book is, of course, since come up missing, and there is a numbered code on every page. Since the summer of 1990, we haven't been able to break any of these codes. After Roscoe White's accident there in 1971, he lived for 26 hours, and like I said, on his deathbed, he told Jack Shaw all this stuff. But let's look at some of the curiouser things. Two witnesses identified Roscoe White in Dealey Plaza near the picket fence at the time of the assassination. These witnesses are Beverly Oliver and Gordon Arnold. Of course, Beverly Oliver had known who Roscoe White was because she sang at the Carousel Club. Roscoe White's wife worked at the Carousel Club. She knew what he looked like and had seen him in the club before. Now, Gordon Arnold, of course, his story is that two cops had him on the ground, kicked him in the butt, and demanded his film. And one of them was crying and holding a gun and dressed in a police uniform and took his film. An eyewitness was in J.D. Tippett's house a week before the assassination and saw Roscoe White and another man in discussion with Tippett. An ex-CIA operative met Roscoe White in Dallas in the summer of '62 concerning the purchase of guns. A woman's father was friends with Roscoe White and Jack Ruby and was possibly involved with eliminating witnesses. Her father was killed by Dallas police while trying to escape when in custody for conspiracy to murder. A friend of Lee Oswald's in New Orleans was told about Roscoe White in the late summer of '63 by Lee Oswald. A nightclub owner was introduced to Roscoe White by Jack Ruby in the owner's club. Now, there's a theory that, of course, Roscoe White killed Tippett. They stated that he killed Tippett because Tippett decided not to drive White and Oswald to the safe house. And then he went on to take part in eliminating witnesses, most possibly while still dressed as a Dallas policeman. Remember cable number 8. Stay within the department. So, if we're to believe all this, Tippett, White, Oswald, and Ruby all knew each other, all were involved. It would explain the two policemen in the car theory by Earlene Roberts. It could explain the other police car at the site of the Tippett shooting. It could explain what happened to Gordon Arnold. And we have photos taken back in the railroad yard shortly after the assassination of officers back there in the area. So it's crazy, and as we know, people like Warren Reynolds, Domingo Benavides' brother, people like that were shot or killed. Lee Bowers, things happen to people, and supposedly Roscoe was responsible for 28 of these. Now, where all the fun comes in is about 1990, when Ricky White gets associated with researcher Gary Shaw and the Reverend Jack Shaw, and gets involved with researcher Joe West, who, as everybody knows, was partly responsible for the James Files story. And a lot of weird things happened because supposedly they had found the journal that was supposedly thought was lost. Now, one would think that Roscoe White's Reverend Jack Shaw, a man of God, would not be lying about things or making things up. Ricky White, at the insistence of Gary Shaw, the respected researcher, JFK researcher, and his partner, Larry Howard, asked Ricky to take a lie detector test, which he passed. Okay, and he turned over all his father's paper to the research center there in Dallas that Gary Shaw ran. Now there's two Shaws here. There's Gary Shaw and Jack Shaw. Gary Shaw, respected JFK researcher. Jack Shaw, Roscoe White's reverend. Clay Shaw, not related right now. Okay, a lot of Shaws going on. Once that happened, their center was flooded with calls and letters, some of them intriguing, most of them crazy or pathetic, and a few of them helpful. Somebody everybody might be familiar with, Doug Campbell, an ex-Marine and soldier of fortune named Jerry Patrick Hemming, remembered that on a trip to Dallas in 1963 to raise money for Cuban exiles, he met Roscoe White, who tried to sell him some rifles. Okay. The problem came when they teamed up with West and this guy Joe West. Some stuff came up missing. All of a sudden, this Roscoe White's notebook was found again. But the entries were a little screwy. Geneva White was giving these interviews that made no sense. Apparently, let's see here. Apparently, she was a victim of electroshock therapy because something she said was that she had overheard her husband and Jack Ruby in the Carousel Club talking about the assassination beforehand, and they caught her listening, and Jack Ruby wanted to kill her. But Roscoe talked Jack Ruby into making her take electroshock therapy to forget it, what they had talked about, which makes no sense. Supposedly she continued to take this electroshock therapy for like 10 years, even after Ruby was dead. So, I don't know. And like I said, there was a Mauser, a 7.65 Mauser that Roscoe White did own, okay, and Ricky White turned it over to the research team. There was also a .22 Derringer, which is the exact same kind of gun that Lee Oswald injured himself with in Japan. Shot himself in the arm. Which Roscoe White said was the gun that it happened with. But yeah, the people that after Joe West got involved, back a minute. It gets a little crazy here because remember I said in New Orleans that Geneva White was approached by somebody and to give Roscoe a message that they had more work for him. Geneva White later identified Charles Nicoletti as the man she had met in New Orleans. Okay? And as we know from later on, Nicoletti can be tied into the James Files story, which tried to tie it all together. Here we go. It seemed that a second Roscoe White journal had surfaced. Geneva had found it 2 weeks earlier, quite by coincidence, when she happened to knock over a book titled Presidents of the United States. It was hidden under John F. Kennedy. Funny Geneva hadn't mentioned it to me, though I'd interviewed her at her home just a few days after this astonishing discovery. She hadn't even mentioned it to the other members of her family. Instead, she had turned the journal over to Jack Shaw and Joe West. And though it wasn't exactly a quid pro quo, she simultaneously received a payment of $5,300, part of it a gift from the film producer Oliver Stone, and the remainder from Jack Shaw's ministry. Now, this second notebook, journal, whatever you want to call it, appeared to be a fraud, pointing out that the journal was supposedly written between 1957 and 71. It appeared to be written in the same felt-tip pen, all spanning this almost 15-year period. Felt-tip pens weren't used until the early 60s. A most obvious flaw was a mention on the next to last page of Watergate. Apparently, Watergate was to be Roscoe's last assignment, and he refused. The problem with this, other than believing that a man who had killed the president and numerous others would dig in his heels at the idea of taking part in a 2-bit burglary, is that the break-in at the Watergate complex didn't occur until 10 months after Roscoe died. The scandal that we now know as Watergate wasn't called that until weeks after the break-in. When I mentioned this to Joe West, he became indignant and gave me a lecture about how the term Watergate is used more. Watergate is more than 2,000 years old and appears in the 3rd chapter of the book of Nehemiah. Okay? The new journal fractured the White family. That's not my daddy's handwriting, Ricky protested. And that's not the way he wrote. There was a whiny, cringing, self-pitying tone to the prose, strikingly unlike Roscoe White's lean, spare style. The language was turgid, overburdened, and with regrets for what a rotten husband he had been, and gushing with appreciation for Geneva. God, thank you for Geneva. I've got one hell of a woman. Thank you, thank you, thank you, God. Ricky and his wife Tricia believed that Geneva created the second journal with the help of Joe West. Given her nearly hopeless financial situation and the constant admonitions of others, imploring her to come up with something else, some new piece of evidence, so this thing can be viewed as more than just a hoax. So, tying it all up here, whether you believe the Roscoe White story or not, I tend to believe the early parts, but where it goes off the rails for me is, of course, when Geneva takes everything out of control in the early 90s and taints everything as a fraud due to hoaxing the second journal. But these things happen. But that's the story of Roscoe White. I thank everyone for joining me today. Please continue liking, following us on Facebook. Check out the 22 November website. This can all be accessed right under my picture on the info page here on Spreaker. Everything is one click away. Facebook, website, Twitter, everything. Stay in touch. That's it for this week. It's up to the satellite, beam down to your ears. This is Rob Clark. Out.
Raining zombies like a bastard out here. Let fly the monkey of war.
There's a place where the boat leaves from. It takes away all of your big problems. You could worry, you could drop them in the blue ocean, but you gotta get away to where the boat leaves from. Take 1 part sand, 1 part sea, and 1 part shade of a 9-9 tree. And the drinks are cold and the reggae is hot, and I know this is the place for me. Get away to where the boat leaves from. It takes away all of your big problems. You could worry, you could drop them in the blue ocean, but you gotta get away to where the boat leads. You hear me?
Pain is temporary.